everyone. I'm calling the Budget Committee meeting to order, and I just would like to comment, since the first time I've been in this room, that it's pretty fancy digs. And I really appreciate the opportunity it's going to offer us to hopefully be able to communicate with our citizens and have them come and communicate with us directly, if not online. So we'll begin with the introductions, starting with me. I'm the chair, Leslie Schochner. I'm a citizen member, and I think we can go around this way and come around that way and then get the staff.
Desi Nicodemus, City Councilor.
Mary Rowe, citizen member.
David Cheatzazon, citizen member.
Robert Massey, City Council.
Sophie Sherman Burton, citizen member. Lisa Beatty, mayor.
And we have one, oh yeah, okay. So we have online, Ann Ober.
Oh, hi, Ann Ober. I'm the city manager for Milwaukie, and we do have a few people out today excused. So Councilor Kasrabati is out excused this evening, and then Councilor Stavnord and I are both online tonight.
Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. Rebecca Stavnjord. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a city councilor.
Thank you. And now with the staff here.
Hi, good evening. I'm Emma Sagor, Assistant City Manager.
Good evening, Toby LaFrance, Finance Director.
Michael Osborne, Assistant Finance Director.
Okay, so let's get started. I actually have asked to have the minutes pulled tonight, so because I'm concerned that there's not the detail in it that I think there should be, both for us to refer back to what we said and did, and also for citizen members to know that. And so we have a process whereby, come in, you're over there. Our final citizen member has arrived, William Johnson. And so the other thing that I would like to do before we go into the rest of the meeting is talk about the back of the agenda, which has the Budget Committee meeting and the Citizen Utility Advisory Board meetings. And what I want to talk about is the Citizen Utility Advisory Board meetings. At our last meeting, we talked at some length about the committee taking on additional responsibilities to do that, and made a request for some briefing on it, and there was some discussion about whether or not it would be in concert with the other meetings. But I am now looking at a schedule that I have to say was not ever discussed with me as to whether or not it would work. And the other point that I want to make is that there are three monthly meetings in a row, which is a significant difference from what my understanding was. And I think, I mean, maybe other people, well, Sophie's probably way ahead of us in terms of what the roles and responsibilities of the CUAB are, but I don't have at this point any idea what their workload is, what their timelines are. I mean, we have had time where we could have received some of that information to prepare for it. And so at this point, I'm, sitting here going, when are we going to learn what this is about, and why do we have this many meetings? I mean, part of what I understood was that there might be a way to streamline some of what CUAB did into what the budget is doing. So I am just raising that as an issue, and that perhaps we should set a meeting that would be an introductory meeting of what the roles and responsibilities are, and then go into whatever deadlines are supposed to happen. But it seems to me that the members of the committee ought to be part of that conversation. So that's my request.
Chair Schochner, this is actually something that is on tonight's agenda. However, if you want to skip ahead, I'm happy to address your concerns now if you'd like to do that now.
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it took me by surprise, so I would like to have some answers.
So briefly, and what I'll do is I'll start with a summary, and maybe we can get to a little bit more information later in the agenda. Possibly I can answer all the questions right now. So first off, want to start with an apology. I'm sorry, I did not bring this to you in advance of this meeting.
Not just me,
So I
all
put,
the citizens.
yes, and thank you. Yes, I didn't bring it to the members of the CUAB prior to this meeting in terms of the schedule. And on the first meeting, that is, and this is a tentative proposed dates, the general sequence is what we're looking to do. And so there's two things that are happening. At the August meeting of the Budget Committee, one of the things we heard from the resident members of the Budget Committee is the desire for an orientation. So we have added an extra meeting. It's currently scheduled for the beginning of December. And that's the purpose of that meeting, is to provide orientation. What does the CUAB do? What's the roles? What's the responsibilities? So to hopefully alleviate that concern, the purpose of that first meeting is to take care of the concern you addressed, Chair Schochner. And one of the things that's happening is the CUAB has some additional responsibilities going into the budget, having to do with the capital improvement plan, setting rates that will help inform how we're funding the budget for our utilities. So as we're launching into a budget cycle, there are a couple of extra meetings that the CUAB typically has. And one of the things we were trying to do is make sure that we are balancing somewhere between some of the efficiencies, Chair Schochner, that you were mentioning. And there was also some concern we heard from Council about not making sure that the CUAB is fulfilling its full responsibilities. So we're trying to balance those two things, and I think it'll take a little while for us to work through that. The third item would be that what we're looking at, what we're proposing, once we get into sort of the normal rhythm of the CUAB, are quarterly meetings. We think that staff thinks that they should be prior to budget committee meetings, because a lot of times the work of the CUAB feeds into the budget committee. And so what this proposed schedule has is, if budget committee is typically the third Monday of the month, and sometimes it becomes the second Monday of the month because of holidays, that CUAB would be the first Monday of the month. And if we need to change that, we can totally do that. It's simply the beginning place to propose this. So I think hopefully that's addressed most of the concerns you just shared, and happy to hear anything more from the committee at this point in time.
Comments from the committee?
I have a quick question on that. I think it's kind of an add-on to the meetings being separate from the budget meetings. I think that's also, as much as it pains me to have extra meetings, I think it is helpful to members of the community, because if it was embedded in the budget meetings themselves, it would be hard for, a citizen that wanted to talk about utilities. I personally, I'm a budget guy, so I'd probably be at a budget meeting, but if I was, are you better? Sorry. I remember the old place that said like 6 inches away.
You can pull it. Very good.
Sorry. Sorry about that. I was thinking about this after the last time we talked, that it's beneficial to have, make sure that the public knows that these are available and separate from, so they're not just, you don't have to go to a specific budget meeting itself. So I think I see the value of that. Is that kind of part of the intention as well?
Correct. That is part of the intention.
Okay, thanks.
So I have I guess I have two questions. One is, when the presentation is made, I would find it helpful if we can see actual documents, historical documents that give some sense of it rather than just an overview. I mean, those are the kind of things we're going to need to become familiar with. And I don't see, I mean, if it's possible, send any of that information out about how it operates and what the charge is before the meeting. I always find it helpful to have things ahead of time to read and think about before a meeting, rather than trying to follow up on it in a meeting. I've said it before and I'm not embarrassed to say it again. I don't think as fast as I used to. And then the other thing I have is, I'm just wondering, who staffs this? Is Peter going to continue to staff that subcommittee, or will it be jointly, or who's going to staff the new subcommittee?
So I'm primary on the CUAB. That's part of the change that's happening. Peter will be a frequent special guest star, and or somebody from the public works staff, since ultimately we are dealing with utilities. You're going to be learning about the utilities, some of the primary work once we hit the stride of the quarterly meetings. If you look at some of the later meetings that are on here, it's talking about the storm system plan. So that's something that Public Works is going to be undertaking, and that's something that will become a primary piece of work for the CUAB, and something you'll get to be involved in. So yes, I mean, we will be able to get you some actual documents. And once we get there, I'll talk with Peter, see if I can dig up some of the couple of the last meetings in terms of what's been provided, and so you can get some sense as to what they've been dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, if there are minutes of that meeting with attachments, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. So I don't want people to do a lot of extra work, but I would find it helpful to have that kind of background. Okay, so.
I ask a question, or
Yeah.
just make
Go
a
right
comment.
ahead.
The January 8th CIP review, I have to say, I will probably, I don't know if these are going to be online or not, but I will probably want to attend that. I feel like the last budget cycle, we didn't get enough of the CIP discussion in the actual budget meetings. The CIP felt a little bit like an afterthought, and I felt like I wasn't up to speed on what all was in the CIP. So I would encourage counselors to actually attend that meeting, unless that's going to be built into our budget meetings.
Mayor Beatty, yes, the February Budget Committee meeting will have some emphasis on the CIP process and potential CIP projects for the budget. Now, because of Oregon budget law, we can't present to you a proposed CIP. We can't do that until we get to the actual budget hearings. That said, a lot of the focus of the February Budget Committee meeting will be around the CIP.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it does strike me that that's one of the things that we're going to have to work out, is the degree to which the subcommittee can do work that is not just replicated at the budget committee, but is useful enough to the council that they can take it forward from there. And I think that's probably going to take some time and effort to sort it out. So, but I certainly do look forward to having it done. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the public comments. Any community members that would like to discuss any city business with the committee. If there are those wishing to speak not at City Hall, please email finance@milwaukieoregon.gov or raise your hand in Zoom. I don't think we have anybody on Zoom, right? We do?
We have one here in person and one on Zoom.
Yeah, she's got the card.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and you can write a comment in Zoom chat. So I have a speaker card for Elvis Clark, who wants to talk about the chart on page 6 of the quarterly report.
And we also got a written comment from him. That's
But I don't think I do. Did I?
Okay.
Oh, maybe I haven't.
Okay.
All the way through.
His email is in the packet of information that's in front of you this evening.
I wanted to point out chart 6 of the quarterly financial report. When you look at it, it seems to be saying that the property tax collections need to be doubled, or sort of like that, or something like that, because you put it in context of page 5 in the chart on there, it shows almost a gap between real market value and tax assessed value. But I don't think this is a fair representation of the city's financial position. Clearly, the property tax collections in the dark bar leave out indirect property tax collections and other tax collections that are categorized as intergovernmental transfers. And I look at other cities surrounding Milwaukie and their budget documents, and I don't see these two charts in there, or the emphasis put on this issue. And then the other thing is that the council made this decision back in 2016 to rope off a steady increase in property tax collections into urban renewal. And I submitted written testimony on that. So that's that. So I think for the taxpayers' perspective, there needs to be some kind of revision or reframing in these two charts, because they kind of give, it's a lot more complicated than these two charts, the relationship between the collections that the city is making, or the revenues that the city is bringing in, and the actual operating expenses of the general fund. That's my comment, is I think it needs to be reworked.
I hear what you're saying, and I know that this particular chart was developed specifically to talk about the ways that property taxes are limited in, but I also am very aware that that we don't operate a budget that's out of balance. There are other funds that come in, and it has occurred to me on occasion that maybe we need to just have a couple of pie charts that show the total picture of revenues and expenses. Would that be something that would satisfy your concern?
Just to put, it's for the taxpayer, it seems like these two charts, like I say, are just saying that you need a big sharp increase in property taxes to meet your expenses, but it ignores like the library.
Well, the library
governmental transfer that's left out of the dark bars.
No, it's in the general fund now. The library.
The library expenses are, but not the county, Clackamas County levied property taxes. So the property taxes are more than what you're showing up in the dark bar there, because it's indirect. But property taxpayers are still helping meet the finances of the city, more so than your dark bars are. And then there's other taxes that are.
Right.
And so it's kind of like a misleading thing to say the taxpayer isn't really.
I hear what you're saying. I do think that having charts that show the total picture would address your concern. Although the issue that is being highlighted here is around the fact that much of those other revenues are not stable and repeating year after year. I mean, for example, during COVID, the city got a lot of extra money and was able to do a lot of extra things, but those are not recurring revenue the way that the property tax is.
I don't think that comes through though in these 2 pages, that your concern is the stability of your revenues. That doesn't come through. And you need to reframe it to.
Maybe we need to work on it and work on some charts that could be added that would show what your concern is.
Yeah,
Can I ask a quick question to Toby? The orange or yellow, I'm kind of colorblind, but the operating costs, does that include like utilities and other like?
No, those are in the enterprise funds.
Okay, so like as Leslie mentioned, there's 17 million or so of operating costs and only 9 million of or 9 million or so of revenues. What's the biggest, I didn't know it's on the spot, but what would be like the biggest difference like to fill that?
So first off, the purpose of the chart is in the first sentence of the text below it, which is to show that property taxes as a revenue source relative to the operations of the city's general fund, which doesn't include the utilities or the building division, but it's a lot of the general public services. It's police, it's library, it's community development, and so it's those core city services where the primary funding source is property tax. However, it is a shrinking percentage relative to our operating costs. In other words, growth in property tax does not keep up with the growth in demand for services. And so that's the primary thing we're trying to show here.
Just in terms of cost of living increases to our staff, it's not.
Yeah.
And so, and in terms of the larger picture, we do have some other things in the larger budget document. The quarterly report's meant to be at summary level, and we can't hit everything. That said, there might be good ideas since we have quarterly reports. Maybe first quarter we highlight all revenues as in a pie chart. Second quarter, we could highlight something else. Third quarter. So we could do something where we add a little, something new and fresh each quarter and repeat that each quarter so that people could start and track that over time. I think that's something we could totally do. We can't answer every question in the quarterly report. However, happy to try and provide more and better information whenever we can.
But is there like sorry, just to go back to that, is there like a specific, like, is it, COVID funds from the federal government or something that, because I agree. I kind of see what's happening, that like it's 50% of property tax collected pays for operating costs this year or in 2018, and then it's like 30%. And we're balancing the budget each time because we have to, and I'm glad we do. But like what's filling, like how are we getting this?
The primary other revenues for the general fund would be the top two would essentially be our right of way. So that's where our various utilities pay to use one of the city's most valuable assets, which is our streets, which make a very nice linear way for them to provide their services. And for the ability to use those services, they pay a percentage of their revenues to the city. And then after that would be various intergovernmental revenues. So this would be things we get from the state, liquor tax, the marijuana tax, that kind of thing. And I should add in, be remiss of me not to also say transfers from other funds. So within the city's general fund are administrative services, myself, finance, because we do payroll for the whole city and pay everybody's bills. We have human resources in here, we have an IT, we have a city manager's office. And so everybody gets allocated a share of those costs, which includes other general fund departments are responsible for a share, but our utilities, our building fund, and even funds that don't have services, but for which, for instance, I still have to do the accounting for our SDCs and the construction excise tax. So those will also pay a small dollar amount to pay for their share of those services.
I think, David, as we go through the budget process, you'll have a much clearer idea of that. Yeah.
I would just want to say about, I get Mr. Clark's point that, you know, yes, we pay into a library. Our property tax has a library district. And so that is an indirect fund that's not shown on this chart. But I do think the purpose of this section, this property taxes section, is pretty important because a lot of, and just to give a bigger, broader, context, a lot of cities are in crisis because of the measures 5 and 50 have so constrained incomes that a lot of cities are in crisis. If you go on, Google News and look up Beaverton's budget woes, Beaverton was really struggling this year to get to a budget. Gresham put out a bond measure to pay for police and fire and library and parks and a bunch of things that did not pass. I mean, cities are really struggling, and we have been okay so far, but we do face big constraints because of measures 5 and 50, and I think this is an important thing to show in our budget document.
If I may, Chair Schachner, City Manager Hanover has her hand up.
Okay.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in. We're actually in the middle of public comment, and we still have one more person. So if it's okay, I'd like to jump to the next one. And then if there is continuing conversation that we'd like to have at the end of the night about any additional points, I think it would be great to add those at that point. Is that okay?
Yes, fine. So
Thanks.
Who's our next? Next person?
Anderson is online.
William Anderson.
Hello. Hi, Chair Schachner, members of the Budget Committee. I ironically was here to talk about measures 5 and 50, so we can keep the good times rolling and keep talking about it. I just came to talk a little bit about the crisis that we've seen. I work in the legislature as Chief of Staff to Representative Ben Bowman in Washington County, and it's just like you were saying already, like cities across the metro region are experiencing crisis because of measures 5 and 50 and the constraints they put on our revenue system. And like Milwaukie, I think is faring well because we've had really strong leadership to make sure that we have a stable budget. We've seen investments like our SAFE funds, SSMP, that have found really creative ways to kind of fill up some of the holes in our budget. But I really think that this is an issue that we should be talking about. To have stable budget services, it lets us as a city do some really creative things. If we want to do stuff on climate change or investing in green infrastructure or finding ways that we can address homelessness in a small city like this, we can't do that without a stable source of funds. And so I'm just here today to kind of bang on that drum and say measures 5 and 50 is something that is really serious. And we as a city in the next council session or some other time need to set aside a goal to be able to focus on our revenue stream to make sure that we're accounting for the revenues that we're losing because of failed appreciation of property taxes. So thank you for having me to testify.
Thank you. And do we have anybody else that wants to?
No.
Okay. Then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the strategic plan and vision, mission, and values process that our Assistant City Manager, Emma Sager, is going to lead.
It's a tongue twister. Yes, and I know we have a packed agenda and we're running a little behind, so I'm going to make this really brief. Toby is going to pull up just a couple visuals so I can talk to those. But I wanted to give you all an update on an internal city process we are doing right now to develop an operational strategic plan. And we are intentionally doing this. We started real fast in late summer with this effort so that it can inform the development of our operational budget heading into the next biennium. So why are we doing this? You all know we adopted a community vision in 2017, and we've really invested a lot of time in this city to that kind of how we operationalize that long-term vision through things like our comprehensive plan and our climate action plan. What we haven't had a chance to do yet is define exactly what that vision means for what I'm going to call Team Milwaukie, which is the 146 people who work here, and really translate that big long-term 20-year vision down into the day-to-day operations. So what we're aiming to do with the strategic plan effort is to clarify and align our priorities between that near-term 3-year horizon and that long-term vision. Then focus our resources so that we can deliver those priorities. We also want to get a little bit more strategic in how we're measuring success. We know there are performance measures in the budget document, but we want to make sure those are not just performance measures for performance measures' sake, that they really are helping us track and evaluate how we are moving towards our policy priorities. So through this effort, through this near-term strategic planning effort, we're also going to be taking a closer look at those budget performance measures. And all of this, again, is to move us towards those North Stars that the council has adopted, the community has adopted, and now we as Team Milwaukie are adopting. As we've been going through this, we have had kind of 2 disclaimers we've shared with staff, and so we want to make sure we're sharing the same disclaimers with you all. We've been telling folks that, there will be no staff reductions or positions at risk because of this. Sometimes when people hear strategic plan, they think reduction in force or, big reorganization. That's not the plan here. It's really about all the things you see on the slide. But we also have been really clear that this also isn't a chance to create brand new departments, and a huge windfall of new resources is heading our way, as much as I wish that was the case. So as we just talked about with the resource constrained environment we're dealing with, this is a chance to be more strategic and focused. So what's going to be in that strategic plan? The first thing is some North Stars. So we have spent some time, I'm going to share these with you in just a second, translating the community vision into a organizational vision, mission, and values. That's kind of the target we're heading for. Then the strategic plan, the roadmap, is going to have 3 components. It's going to have goals, 3 to 5 max for the whole city. Objectives that underpin those goals, that are measurable outcomes we're driving towards the next 3 years, and then the tactics, the things we're going to do to move it forward. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be creating key performance measures for that roadmap so we know how to stay on track. And again, it's really critical that all of this is aligned to our broader policy priorities. This is not meant to be confusing or in contrast to the comprehensive plan, to council's goals, et cetera. It's just aligning that operation, the internal operations, with where the city wants to go. Where are we right now? If you go one more click, we've been busy. We've got vision, mission, values. I'll show those to you in just a second. We're gathering a lot of data as part of an environmental scan for this plan, including results from internal staff surveys, learning from all the public engagement that has been done on previous long-term planning efforts. And we are right now, you may have received a phone call or an email, we're conducting a community survey. We tend to do those every 2 years, but it was important for us to do this one off cycle, do it actually a year after the last one, so we have the most up-to-date information to inform the plan. We've sorry, let's go back one second. We have been focusing on goals and objectives. Actually, I'm locking the directors in a room with me on the Wednesday and Thursday of this week to kind of finalize those. And then we're going back out to our staff in December to start talking tactics and measures. It's a really aggressive timeline because we want to get this all done by February so that when staff and managers are putting their budgets together, they are informed by the lenses of this process. So I did want to share with you these statements that staff came up with and our management team has accepted as how we translate the city's North Stars to be our organizational Team Milwaukie North Stars. So our kind of translation of the city's vision is that Team Milwaukie is a diverse and resilient city government, delivering effective public services that make our community a great place to be. Our mission, so our core purpose and how we live that out every day, is that we serve as stewards of our living and built environment to help create a safe and welcoming community for all. And then we've also adopted these 5 values for Team Milwaukie. So we strive to be accountable, which means we build trust through transparency and we take responsibility for the impact of our actions. We strive to be accessible, meaning we're responsive and we remove barriers to participation. We want to be efficient, using our resources wisely to deliver work effectively. Collaborative, we want to work together across the city, but also with our community partners, seek multiple perspectives and lead with empathy. And we strive to be equitable, meaning we acknowledge history, we meet people where they are, and we reduce disparities. I just wanted to kind of share with you sort of what's coming up. I mean, I could talk to you for a lot longer and I didn't got a lot to get to, but these kind of 4 key points, when we talked to all of our staff, we went department by department and had 3-hour workshops. These themes cut across all of those, whether it was public works, whether it was finance, whether it was community development. Some themes were, number one, supporting and investing in our employees and making sure people want to come and build careers here in Milwaukie and build their skills while they're here. Two is working smarter together, things like process improvements and technological investments that can make us more efficient and accountable to the people we serve. A real interest in the staff being a part of revitalizing Milwaukie, investments in downtown, investments in the waterfront, and celebrating what makes Milwaukie special. And then a theme of helping Milwaukeeans most in need, people who are experiencing crisis, people who are and have experienced historic and continuing disparities in our community, really making our equity work actionable. There's just some graphics. So what's coming up next? We're going to complete that community survey, solidify those goals and objectives, identify tactics and measures, and then integrate it into your process. So again, this was lightning fast. I'm super happy to share more information and make sure Toby and Michael can provide you whatever you need. But we're excited about this. We think this will make us inform or help us prepare a smarter and more informed budget proposal for all of you that again connects those dots between the long-term vision and those short-term operational needs. Thank you.
Thank you.
I commend you for this work. This is exciting work to bring the higher level council goals down into actionable items that not only citizens but also employees can get behind and be real focused in the work that's going on here. So it's great stuff.
Thank you.
Say the same. Any other questions? Okay, moving along, we will now have the city manager update from Ann.
Hi, everyone. I don't have a ton today. The last time we met, we had not yet opened our new city hall, so welcome to your large CIP project. We are working on some large construction projects on roadways. King is probably the one that you're going to hear the most about right now. We also have a number of projects in development right now for private development. So the Henley Place apartments are coming near to fruition. We have Hillside that is expected to start pulling permits this winter. We have the Bonaventure project that is in construction. That's the senior care facility that's over by North Clackamas Park. So things are still going full throttle here in the city of Milwaukie. But I think the few things that I wanted to just make sure everybody saw in the budget were, number one, we are spending money faster out of our M&S budget than we have in the past 6 years prior. So I just wanted to make sure that people are seeing that. It's due to a number of things that Toby's going to talk about tonight, but a few big projects. We talked at the last council meeting about the police issues that are happening with state testing and the carrying load of our officers while they go through training. Another issue that's arisen is a broken cooler that we have in cooling system in the library. It's actually been an issue since we opened the library back in 2020. That year, we have spent $100,000 on trying to get the cooler back up and running. That's not for parts, that's for consultants and experts to try and help us get that online. So, and then you have things like inflation, raising costs on all products. Just generally, things are getting more expensive, and we had some really big projects that we spent money on this year. So the big things we built were also just generally more expensive. Does anybody have any specific questions about what's happening at the city that you'd like to ask?
Can you say more about the library and why that kind of thing wasn't covered under the warranty that came with a new building?
We actually continue to have the parts under warranty. So we continue to get new parts over and over again, but the cost of getting to figuring out the problem and getting the right parts into the solution have been part of what we've been paying for. So this is been a constant battle over the last 3 years for Damian Farwell and his team as we've tried to figure out how to keep the system going. We think we have a solution right now. If we do, then hopefully we don't have to even replace more parts. But that has been the balancing act.
Peter came up to the table, so maybe he wants
Oh, hi, Peter.
Yeah, I would just mention we have been working with both the builder and, the installer of the Climate Cool system that we've had. And, since that was installed, the system was installed and was brought into operation, we've had the compressors fail numerous times, I think 8 times total. And the Climate Cool, the vendor, has replaced those compressors. We have another set of compressors that we're going to replace. We've also think we've determined what the root cause is after working with the mechanical engineers that designed the system and the some of the heating HVAC technicians. So I think we've got it sorted out where we're going to add an additional bypass that will allow some of the bypass to flow and change some of the piping that's set up going to the compressors. So I think we have it. I think we've identified the root cause. I think double fingers crossed. But it's been a long, drawn-out process for sure.
And how much does it cost us overall over 3 years?
Well, over this last biennium, we've spent about $140,000, I think, is what it is on compressor HVAC issues. Now, that's our line item for HVAC, but the majority of it's been spent at the library. Trying to troubleshoot those issues there. And it is it is using a heat pump, electric heat pump system, and the Climate Cool system that we're using is one of 2 that are in operations for commercial sized buildings. So it has taken a little bit of time to get through and work out the bugs. Actually, a long time, to be honest. But yeah.
Is there any chance they would ever pay us that money back since it hasn't ever worked?
I can't ask that. I do know if we continue to have issues, we've been in conversations with Justin, our attorney, to look at what are the potential next steps there. So.
And with it being winter time, and this is mostly air conditioning related, and I want to say this is the issue where it's in the staff portion of the area that really sucks for them. I'm really sorry for all of them. But is there ways that it's being periodically tested then going into next summer?
Well, we do have for heating. We have actually a backup electric boiler that provides that heat source that's separate from these heat pumps. So we have relied on those.
Oh, so the issue is heating and air conditioning.
It is the heat pump that provides heating and cooling. But we have been able to manage the winter and last summer too. I mean, there was a time where it was pretty darn close. We were worried, but we were able to get through. So.
Good to know. Thank you.
Any other questions? Do you have anything else to say, Anne?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll go on to Toby and the quarterly financial report.
Give me just a moment here to bring the PowerPoint back up. All right. Thank you. And so we're on to agenda item number 7, which is the quarterly report. Each of you within your packet, you both had an online packet plus a printed packet in front of you. The bulk of the printed packet is the quarterly report. And what I'll do is I'll highlight a couple of items throughout this report try and give you page numbers where possible, and then be available to answer any questions that you might have. So towards the beginning of the report, we always provide a handful of highlights. And for this quarter, we continue to be able to show that year over year, our fund balance is higher than it was for the same quarter last year. However, the reason for that is because of bond revenues that we have received related to transportation projects. So that's the bulk of the reason we have higher fund balances. Our local government investment pool, so essentially our interest income on our investments, continues to be above our budgeted amount. While this is something that is definitely welcome, it's one of those more volatile revenues that David was talking about, and so it's helped us to cover some of our revenues that may be coming in a little low, and it's certainly welcome. It's not something we're going to count on or build budgets off of necessarily in the future. And then one of the things that's different in this document from the last several quarters is during the pandemic, we started reporting on receivables within our utility billing that were past due because people are having a difficult time paying their utility bills, understandably. And there have been programs that have been put in place to help people get caught up. And I'm happy to report that through a lot of work by a number of staff at the city, help from the county, we've been able to get our receivables back to pre-pandemic levels, and it's something that we feel we can stop reporting on within this document. Should it ever spike again, I would definitely let people know. However, we're hopeful that that's not going to be the case.
Hey, Toby.
Yes.
Can you just tell me what MRC is? I'm just going to ask about all the acronyms.
I try thank you for catching that. And it's our it's our urban renewal.
Okay.
So it's the Milwaukie Redevelopment Commission. So on page 6, we've already had a pretty good conversation about this graph. The one thing that we didn't really hit on is there's a noticeable jump to fiscal year 23. And just want to point out that this is moving our library, which used to be in its own fund prior to fiscal year 23, into the general fund. So what that means is twofold. So the dark bar, which is our property tax collections, there used to be a certain amount of our general property tax, which we diverted over to the library fund. The library is primarily funded by two things, which is the county levy, which we receive as an intergovernmental revenue to the city, and then we make up the difference between that and our costs by using property tax. So we would take and move some property tax over to that library fund. So in prior years, we did not see that as a general fund property tax. So that describes the bulk of the increase for fiscal year 23 in that darker bar. The lighter bar, the orange bar, that's our general fund operating expenses. And so our library has now moved into the general fund. So that has brought up a good section of that increase. The other major piece that's actually in there is, as Ann mentioned, we are spending at a higher rate in our materials and services. So that has also helped to bump up the expenses in our operations in our general fund.
I have a question. The graph that you're showing on the screen doesn't match the graph in the packet.
It doesn't. We're gonna correct this document in the packet. I realized that we were including some non-operating expenses in the document that's in your packet. And so before we post this online, we will put in this version that it doesn't change the talking points, but I want to make sure that before we post this online to the public that we put in the corrected one. And so, good eye. And
crazy spot.
Yeah.
All right. hitting pages 7 through 10 of the document. So a couple quick comments here on our franchise fees or right-of-way revenues. One of the things that the city is looking to do is to transition Northwest Natural and PGE from franchise agreements, which can have some of their own special terms, to our right-of-way code. In essence, for our revenues, it really shouldn't make a significant difference. It's more about how they operate and work with the city. For consistency's sake, we are looking to have them transition so they're treated just like any other utility within the city. Staffing, 3% of our positions were vacant during the quarter. And one of the things that I wanted to take just a moment to do is, if you look at that table on page 8, and when we see somebody where it says, like for instance, in the city manager's office, there was a half FTE vacant, and there's a bullet above there, and it says that we were able to bring in one of their positions in the middle of August. So essentially what that table is trying to do is translate the number of hours within a quarter that positions were vacant or full. So, for example, during the quarter, if there is one position that is vacant, if you have a full year, a position is 2,080 hours. During a quarter, that would be 520 hours. So we had a position that was vacant for 520 hours. When you see in the city manager's office that there was a half FTE, that meant that we had a position that was vacant for roughly 260 hours during that quarter. So that gets us to the half FTE, about half of 520. And just wanted to say that because what we're doing is, if we have multiple positions that are either become vacant or got hired or were vacant the whole time, we're trying to translate that into a single measure, which we're putting in there as FTE. So I just wanted to that was actually something I started questioning a little bit more between the last report and this report. It's something I learned, so I wanted to make sure I shared it with this group so you know how to read this table.
And the FTE number is 2080?
So for myself, I will work 2,080 hours during a fiscal year.
That's the question I was asking.
Yes.
I asked that question because we used that many years ago when I was at the city of San Antonio. And when I first moved to Oregon 30 years ago and worked on public budgets, nobody knew what I was talking about.
So, and then finally, citywide fund balances. So I mentioned earlier that year over year, fund balance has gone up. One of the things you can see.
What page are you on?
I'm sorry, so now I'm referencing to page 10.
Oh, could we talk about page 9?
Page 9. Yes, we can.
I just want to say that it's the revenue forecasting assumptions. And as I was reading the report, I found certain revenues that I couldn't look up here to see what the schedule was for. So I'm just suggesting that this be updated in the new budget process so that there is a concordance between the two. Because frankly, people would get confused about, well, why is it so low when the property taxes hadn't come in yet or whatever. So thank you.
We can look for additional places. I know you're not the only one who asked some questions about that. Generally, where we haven't put it in here, it's because it doesn't come in on a specific schedule. That said, if we're missing some, we are happy to add them into this table. Going to page 10, it does show that over the first quarter of the year, our change in fund balance is about $3.5 million down. And if you look at the graph that's below, there's, I think, two areas that stick out. One is the very bottom, and that's your general fund. And here what you have are our expenditures, the dark line, are far greater than the revenues we brought in during the first quarter. In fact, they are $4.5 million greater than what we brought in during the first quarter. One of the things that we'll be talking about during the budget process, and also comes up in the forecast discussion that we'll be having shortly, is the general fund does have a policy that we try and keep a quarter of our operating expenses in the fund balance. And so that's sort of our minimum fund balance. And what you're looking at is the reason why. During the first quarter, and actually a couple of months in the second quarter, we are providing the regular services of the city, yet our primary revenue of property tax doesn't come in until about now. We just received our first sort of smaller amount last week. We expect that by this week or next week, we'll start getting the larger allotments of our property tax. So we need to be able to make payroll and pay the bills until that comes in, and that's why we've got that 25% minimum threshold that we try and maintain.
So when you talk about that, is that the same thing we always hear, reserves?
Yes.
Okay.
So, yes.
25 is reserves, and that's like meant to be a carryover year to year.
It's a city policy, and yes, so we try and reserve a quarter of our operating expenses each year in our savings, our fund balance, our reserve, however you want to refer to it, and so that we have money in the bank, savings in the bank, until we get our big paycheck, which is our property tax.
Now I'm confused. My understanding is that reserves are budgeted in each division, department, whatever. But the fund balance also includes unappropriated funds, right? I mean, they're not the same. I mean, what is being budgeted, are we budgeting 25% and then we have a fund balance on top of that?
No. So I'm sorry, I didn't explain it properly then. What we've got are our reserve policy. So we have our reserves.
Right.
That's the amount that's essentially, if you look at it in a budget, on June 30th, we will have an ending fund balance
right,
of reserve of a certain dollar amount. And then on July 1st, that becomes your beginning fund balance for the next fiscal year. And our policy is that reserve at the end of the fiscal year needs to have 25% of the next year's operating costs, so that we can go from July 1st until we get to property tax collections in the middle of November and pay all of our bills, make a payroll. Does that help?
It has to do with the fund balance.
Yes.
It's not necessarily talking about what's budgeted in the reserves.
It is a policy about the level of the fund balance. How much fund balance do we need to have?
Right, okay.
Does that help?
Yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
perfect.
Okay.
The other one that sticks out on page 10 is the construction excise tax. There we had a very large expenditure, very small revenue. That was something that actually at the end of the last fiscal year, we did a supplemental because we got some grants related to development that we are awarding or awarded. So that was actually a use of reserves that the city made to support that expenditure. And construction excise tax is one of those revenues that is irregular, and so in the first quarter there wasn't very much.
And what does it come from? What is it?
It comes during the development process, and it's a charge that gets put on developers during the building process. Essentially, we are using it at this point in time to help with affordable housing.
Yeah, that was one of the ones that I didn't find in that other chart. Okay.
Any other questions on these pages? Okay. Moving on to pages 11 through 17. Just want to point out in the general fund some very key things. And actually one of the things I want to talk about briefly is as we go through any of the funds, you'll see notes along the right-hand side. And what we do is we've set some thresholds by which we will make these notes. Property taxes, we're always going to comment on it just because it is the largest and most important revenue within our general fund. Within any of our funds, if our anticipated actual revenue is going to be more than 120% or less than 80%, it should receive a comment. When our
The
expenditures,
threshold is 20% either way?
20% either way.
Okay.
On the expenditure side, if we think we will, or we're trending to be over 100%, so we're going to have essentially we're trending towards something, a budget that we need to fix, it will get a comment. Likewise, if it's below 70%, we will try and explain that as well. And lastly, some of our funds, general fund in particular, is complicated. There might be several comments. We try and keep it to 10 comments or less. Don't always succeed, but we try and do that, so we might have to prioritize some of our comments. Comments particular to this report: property taxes coming in line. Our intergovernmental revenues are low. Grants are where we have intergovernmental revenues. And we have some projects that are grant funded that are underway, just started. We'll get the grant revenue afterwards. And lastly, a couple of our departments are showing that they're trending to be over budget. We actually expect them to finish the year under budget. It's simply because they had some high expenses in the first quarter. For example, in IT, we pay a lot of our software annual renewals in the first quarter of the fiscal year.
Thank you, that was very helpful.
Good, thank you. Going to pages 19 through 34. Here we have our transportation fund. It's always worth noting one of our primary revenues is an intergovernmental revenue. It's gas tax, and there's always a 2-month log and receipt of those. It's also, you might want to know that we are slated to see a state gas tax increase from 38 cents to 40 cents per gallon starting January 1st. With people in more hybrid and EV vehicles, we don't anticipate that this is going to be an increase in our total revenues. It's more going to be a stopgap to keep revenues from falling faster than they would have otherwise. Another thing just to point out, when you get into these funds, you'll get to a table and it'll show what are some of our obligations. So what are contracts that we have in place that we have encumbered and we haven't fully expended across those contracts. And this is largely where we've got our capital. One of the things you've heard us talking about is us being behind expenditure rates on our capital. And while that continues to be true, one of the things that's notable between the first quarter of fiscal year 24 and the last quarter of fiscal year 23 is that those obligated amounts, especially in our utility funds, is significantly higher. When we look at the end of fiscal year 23 within the water fund, we only had 190,000 in obligated costs. We're now up to 1.3 million. Wastewater was 790,000. We're now up to 1.2 million. And in our stormwater fund, we were at 860,000 at the end of fiscal year 23. We now have obligations of 4.7 million. And so, that construction work is coming down the pike. So I just wanted to point that out. And lastly, at the last half of this report, essentially, is an update on our CIP. It's always a good place to kind of see where projects are in the pike and how we're doing on schedule and on budget. So it's another thing to include here. I think that ends agenda item 7.
Any questions?
I have one quick question, maybe two. Sorry, I know I've asked about this area before, but the non-departmental, I know you mentioned that point number 10 on page 12, the majority is subscriptions and insurance. This just maybe this is me overthinking as a weird nerd accountant, but it kind of strikes me as an other department. And if like, you know, of that 3.2 million or whatever the number is so far, the majority of it is, you know, insurance and subscriptions or something. it might be nice to have that separated out, just to keep me from asking to know.
I agree.
Okay.
I think in the next biennial budget, you'll probably see, if not a full-on risk department, a call out of risks within one of the existing departmental budgets. Because a big portion of this is insurance costs. And in addition, we have some debt service in there. I think that's probably going to get called out separately, and then we have some transfers in there. So yes, I agree exactly with what you're saying, and you should see it displayed differently in the next budget.
Awesome. And then
Talk about being effective.
It sounds like I just recommended something that was already in the works, so that sounds great. That sounds great. Just one other comment really quick on that property tax comments that we had earlier on the graph. I definitely think the graph is worthwhile to see the difference. Just again, I'm probably overly nerdy accountant thinking about this, but the way I've done things like this at work is with the difference, because it does right now, like when I initially look at it, it looks like, oh no, we're like, the US government in a crazy amount of debt or something like that. Would potentially be like if we could fill it in like a really light font, like really light of what the other area is, like a light,
The revenue stacked on top.
Actually, I would favor a separate chart. I don't
Sure.
think we should
Okay.
get rid of that chart. I think that chart is important
Sure.
the way it is. I have a lot of investment in that chart. Right. It's important to not vary that story.
Okay.
In my opinion.
Sure.
Okay, so.
Not to beat this one to death, but I'm sorry, I can't hold back.
Go right ahead.
So I too think that this story is significant, and I like the way that it's presented. But I also think that Mr. Clark had a point in that it was not comprehensive, and so I agree with you. I think it should be displayed separately so that we have a comprehensive view.
Right.
And I would say that if you're going to have this story, you got to have that other story as well. So I know your point. Well, we're not going to do it every quarter. That's great if you don't do this one every quarter. This story every quarter, because I think that full story needs to be, kludged with this whenever it's in the quarterly report. Otherwise, it's not a complete story. I'm sorry, I probably confused you.
No, I think it's clear.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Okay. Anything else? Can we move on to the review of the proposed supplemental budget?
Okay, so just a quick item here, and for Budget Committee, there's no actions being requested of the Budget Committee with the supplemental. Under Oregon budget law, it is the council that approves supplemental budgets. This is essentially presented to you for informational purposes, to keep you up to date on what's going on with the budget that you helped pass in the first place. And in your packet, you should see the staff report that is, or not in the packet, but on the dais in front of you, the staff report on the supplemental. This is actually going to council tomorrow night. It does a couple of key things. Probably the two largest items are that within our facilities division, we are adding $280,000 to that budget. Part of it has to do with the chiller you were just hearing about, and a number of other things where there are some unexpected costs. And this is being funded. We're removing $200,000 of materials and service savings from the community development department within the general fund to our facilities department within the general fund. So for the general fund, that $200,000 is budget neutral. In addition, facilities does support our utilities and other funds within the city. And one of the other items that's been happening is we do have a remodel within at the Johnson Creek building. So just like we've been doing some work on City Hall, Johnson Creek building where Public Works is, has about $20,000 of additional costs over and above the $160,000 that was already budgeted for that project. So all in all, looking at that, what we're doing is $200,000 of the increase is general fund funded. $80,000 is coming from other funds, $20,000 each from water, sewer, storm, and our transportation fund. The other major thing we're doing is in our building fund. Here, what we're gonna, they have had a steady increase in their workload. And it outlines it a bit in the staff report, how much more work they're having to do. They've had 3 staff throughout that entire time. And what they do is, for the work that staff can't get to, because there are requirements about turnaround times in state law, we contract it out. And some of the terms of that contract is whoever receives the contract gets a portion, about 60 to 70% of the building fund revenue goes to that contractor. We have
Is the contractor a public entity or an individual?
We do have a relationship with public entities. We also have a private contractor. And so we use what we can. And what we're looking at here is a couple of large projects are coming in the door, and potentially $1.5 million of building fund revenue, which if we had to contract that out, 65% of it could go elsewhere. And so what we're going to do is 2 things. One, there is a vacant position that's been held vacant this entire biennium in the community development department. We're going to move that position to the building department. So we're not increasing the city's FTE count. We're just making use of the FTE that's been authorized. And we're going to fill that position. That position is going to help support the building services of the community. In addition, because there's been more work and more contracted services throughout the course of this biennium, the budget department is starting to run out of professional service budget. And so we will also add to the professional services budget in the supplemental to keep up with the level of work that's been happening there. In total, while this will add expenses to the building department, the fact that we'll be able to retain a significant portion of the revenue that's coming in actually will help build the building fund department, fund balance or reserves. So those are the 2 primary things that this includes. There's also some grants for projects in parks and some green infrastructure in terms of solar. And also we will be taking, and with the move to the new city hall, we're centralizing how supplies are being done. And so instead of individual departments necessarily having smaller supply budgets, we're kind of taking a bit from a number of different departments and putting into the Office of City Recorder, and they'll be in charge of ordering sort of the routine supplies for City Hall. So those are all items that are in the supplemental. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question that I don't know if it's one to discuss tonight or tomorrow when it comes before City Council, but I guess I get the, I mean, we've seen the building fund balance be way up there for a long time, and that we knew we were contracting out and stuff, and so I get the desire to add that position. I guess I'm a little concerned that it's coming from that community development position, because I guess I thought that was our potential position for our parks goal. You know, we don't know exactly where we're going on parks yet, but we may need a position for parks depending on what we do, and
Mayor?
Yeah.
May I answer that one? So there is still a position over there. There were 2 positions that we could pull from. One was this one, the second one was the parking position. So there is still one available when we get to the goals. Just wanted you to know it's not gone.
Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification.
Any other questions? Okay, I guess we can move on to the Citizen Utility Advisory Board. which raises, I mean, I meant to say this earlier, but I will say it now and hopefully it will apply. When we get presentations, it would be really helpful to me to have the slide deck to look at afterwards, if not at the time. And I am not asking for it on paper necessarily, but I do think that we deal with a lot of complex information and it's helpful to have things to refer back to. So I'm hoping that we can get that. Thank you.
We can include this slide deck to make sure that this is available to the budget committee.
Okay, yeah. And I don't know if there's a slide deck for the CUB discussion, but anyway, that was my idea.
So Chair Schachner, do we need to present on the CUAB again
I
today?
think we're good. I mean, if you don't have anything more to present,
No.
I don't have any more questions. Yeah, okay, so then the initial draft of the financial forecast.
Okay, so yeah, I got one additional handout for the committee here. So I want to lay a little bit of groundwork. So this is just an initial discussion about forecast. It will lead into the budget that you'll be considering in the coming months. And when I was sending the forecast around, meeting with a couple of my colleagues, one of the comments I got was, "Oh, I've seen this forecast before." And so I want to start with some of the forecasts you've seen before and how this one's a little bit different. The forecast that I've seen that's presented in the budget book and then some of the other budget presentations was a budget-based forecast. It did an excellent job of forecasting what the expenditure budget, what the budget revenues would be based upon a certain set of assumptions. And so, as you know, as a budget committee, the budget, when you're talking about expenditures, is the maximum amount that can be set. It's the limit that you as a budget committee have put upon staff in terms of how much we can spend to provide the services of the city. Where this forecast differs a little bit is I'm trying to say, of that budget, so I'm not saying that we change the budget process or the budget amount, but of that budget, how much do we think we're actually going to spend? So what it does is it still takes the same budgeted revenues, because budgeted revenues are actually about what we think we're going to collect. And against those budgeted revenues, it's a slightly smaller expenditure number. So the result should be that since the smaller expenditures against the same revenues, we should get a little bit of additional sustainability. Our fund balances shouldn't shrink quite as fast. And the reason I'm kind of telling that story about the fact that some of my colleagues said, hey, I've seen this forecast before, is the end result is something that they've seen before, and it was with higher expenditures, a more conservative forecast than what I'm forecasting here. So we're getting, with less expenditures, we're getting to the same result, which is, saying that we need to be careful with our budgeting and the management of the city's resources. And I'm going to get into that a little bit here. So the revenues within this initial forecast are based upon historical trends. I've looked at 3, 5, 10-year revenue trends to try and find the revenue trends that seem to fit where Milwaukie is right now. On the expenditure side, so here's where we're differing from the budget. So again, it takes a forecasted budget, and then says, how much of that are we going to actually spend? From personnel, we have historically spent 92 to 93% of the budget that the Budget Committee and Council has provided to us. And I'm forecasting that forward. And I can tell you that in our current biennium, I've been doing a lot of work to see where we're going to land this biennium. And we're in that 92 to 93%. We're right on target. And we're going to be taking, and that personnel expense is going to grow by about 5% per year. That's without adding any FTE. That's just taking the same people we have today, while we might change the mix a little bit, like we just talked about, it's the same number, and how much more will that cost? And it's about 5% annually. One of the things to differentiate there is that doesn't mean a 5% COLA. That's taking everything into account. So it's COLA, it's step increases for people who aren't at the top of the range yet. And it's also increases to benefits such as medical dental benefits. It also takes into account turnover. So somebody at the top of the range leaves, we bring somebody in at a lower pay rate, and so that actually kind of dampens things. So it's trying to capture all of that in the 5%. Materials and services. Historically, we have been spending somewhere around 85 to 87% of our materials and services budget. In the digging into this budget, and Ann talked about this earlier, we are spending a higher rate of our materials and services. We are looking at spending about 95% of our materials and service budget in this biennium. Some of that is one time. It's things like getting ready to move into new City Hall, the revamp that's happening at the Johnson Creek building. There's a number of sort of one-time projects that are happening. Some of it, though, I think is just an increase in inflation that's taking up a big portion of our materials and services budget. So instead, I'm saying that while the growth is going to be about 3% annually, which keeps up with inflation, it's been our historical growth rate in materials and services, the expenditure rate I'm pegging at 90%. So a little higher than the historical rate, not the 95% we're looking at this biennium, and that's something we're going to need to monitor. We're also saying we're going to do things that pay our obligations like debt. We're going to pay our obligations in terms of transfers. And the other thing in this general fund forecast is on the capital improvement plan. The general fund generally is not, most of the time, is not a big player in the capital improvement plan unless it comes with grant revenues. So if you look at our current CIP starting in fiscal year 26, the city in that CIP has about $300,000 a year that it's spending. Most of that's vehicles. And there's a couple of other small things, but that's the bulk of it.
What is the land banking?
Land banking is something that we've got that essentially it's if we have, as a city, opportunities.
Opportunistic.
Yeah. If we have opportunities, we're setting aside $50,000 a year for those opportunities.
Does that get encumbered year by year, or is it always at 50,000?
It's budgeted always at 50,000 each year.
Can you go back and clarify what you were saying about the CIP and this $300,000 a year? You're saying that's grants?
No.
No.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
So within the CIP, there's a lot of different funds that contribute to our capital improvement program. Generally, if the general fund is participating.
This is a general fund forecast only.
Yeah. So what? And if you look at our adopted CIP, we've got some grant-funded projects in our current biennium. Going out a couple of years, the only thing that general fund is contributing to are the land banking, it's the vehicles, so it's some very small dollar amounts adding up to about $300,000 annually.
Okay.
So does that help, Mayor Beatty? Okay, perfect. So after doing this initial forecast and trying to forecast what we're actually going to spend against our revenues, right now we're looking at spending in terms of annual revenues, annual expenditures, about $1 million a year more than we're bringing in. So that means we're using those reserves. We're eating into that fund balance on an annual basis right now. So another way I handed out a table that shows that and kind of steps through some of those assumptions I just gave you. And another way to look at that is some people like to see the graph. So Yes.
Would you say that that is a recurring issue, or it is becoming an issue? In other words, if this kind of analysis had been done a couple of years ago, would it be the same? Because I know that in some ways the forecast is inflexible. It's taking current, it's not taking account of other things that might happen to that. So I'm just wondering if historically that's the same as what you're showing here.
So what I can say is I haven't gone back and sort of retro-engineered all the prior forecasts. What I can say is that Ann, city manager, and this city has been very careful about adding ongoing expenses and holding FTE growth at up to a minimal amount. And so, in prior years, I do know that the fund balance in the general fund has grown. Now, some of that growth was because we received federal funds during the pandemic, but even which then have projects against them, and we'll be spending that part down. But even before that, we had some modest general fund balance growth. And I think what's happened is this whole discussion of 5 and 50 has caught up with the city of Milwaukie. Revenue growth is not keeping up with the growth in our expenses, even though the city's been extremely careful with that growth. And we're getting to the point where our revenues don't keep up.
Well, and I will tell you, 5 or 6 years ago, we were told we would be at that point a couple years before now. I mean, we were getting forecasts that was gonna, we were only 2 or 3 years out.
I think the forecasts always show that you're under because they don't account for the work that develops new projects when it's actually on the ground. I mean, their assumptions are based on known costs, I guess is the way of looking at it.
So,
may I jump in for a minute? Sorry, I can't see the room. I just wanted to comment a couple of things. One is the mayor's correct. We have consistently been told that this is coming. I'm not actually worried. I know that Toby is concerned, but we've already talked about ways that we can solve the current $1 million off situation. So I just wanted to put out there, we're coming in with a flat budget with our staff because we need to. Inflation's real, and we do expect to have some significant increases this next year. But I just wanted to put out there, I'm actually not concerned. I do believe we will be able to balance the budget without too much pain this year.
Just kind of to wrap up this portion, looking at the graph, you'll notice a fiscal year, so 23 and 24 is the biennium we're in right now. And with fiscal year 23, what you'll see is the expenditure graph and the revenue graph. There's a pretty significant gap there with expenses higher than revenues. That was planned. That's us using those ARPA funds that we've received. It's, Metro grant funds that we've received. So that's a known thing. In fiscal year 24, you see expenditures starting to come down. Revenues actually have a bump. And there is, again, it's those intergovernmental, it's those grant revenues. We have a seismic retrofit of our public safety building. It's $1.3 million federal grant to help pay for that project. So that's a case where we've got higher expenses and the revenues budgeted to match coming in the same year. Starting with fiscal year 25, we start getting into the forecast. So there we've got, it's not anticipating, there are no known grants for projects to put into that would raise both either the revenue or the expenditure line. So here we're talking about sort of the ongoing operations, it's the ongoing revenues, and what you can see is that roughly $1 million gap between the expenses and the revenues. And finally, by the time you get out to fiscal year 28, that reserve would not be sufficient to match that dotted line. And that's our policy. That's the 25% that we need to make payroll, pay the bills without having to borrow money to do so. So in this paper. This is something that actually we are kicking off the budget process with our departments on Friday. They have this as well. I wanted to share it with you. It basically explains what I just talked about, and what it means is that what we have in green. So we are asking our departments to pursue a hold the line budget, is everything that Ann was just talking about. Also, I anticipate that I will be having discussions with you about ways that we can enhance our revenues. Because we do need to, through careful management of our expenditures, but also enhancement and management of our revenues, try and close that gap, that $1 million gap. And we do think we can get there. But one of the keys there is that we need to come up with undedicated revenues. So revenue increases that don't necessarily come with an expenditure increase. And so that's sometimes harder to do because it's hard sometimes to tell the community you're going to need to pay more, but they're not getting something different and new and enhanced to go with it. So that's part of the discussion that we're going to be having. And I think that ends the forecast discussion. I think that's the last item I have prepared for the Budget Committee this evening.
Well, that last bit you're talking to council about tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow we start the discussion.
Okay.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think some of the Budget Committee members might want to tune in for that, talking about, what the options are for revenue. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Is there any other business that anybody wants to bring? No? Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Okay, it's been moved by William Johnson and seconded by Mary Rowe that we adjourn this meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.